Osei CIA Encounter by Sandy Ingram. Edited by Taylor Hale. Narrated by Byron Caldwell. Book 2-1. Gill's training with the CIA was long and extensive. It was predetermined he would join the Science and Technology Department under Special Activities of the CIA. After the kidnapping, his family was relocated to South Carolina. Osei Sr. was upset because he could never return to Nigeria, while his mother and younger sister appeared to be adjusting well to their new home. Gill's priority was to finish his training and learn how to stay safe in a world full of uncertainties. Having been born and raised in Nigeria and educated in New Zealand, he was often concerned about fitting in with other native English-speaking recruits, yet nothing could have prepared him for the cultural clashes. Understanding why Americans do what they do was challenging for Gill, who had problems understanding why students in the training were matched up against one another. Each student was supposed to be working for a common cause, the gathering of information for the sole purpose of keeping the country safe. Gill believed this competitive attitude would carry over into their work ethics at the agency. He would later learn how effective this method of training was. Operatives automatically challenged each other in every operation, making it easier for the highest thought to prevail. Fortunately for Gill, his duties would include technology spying, more than being a James Bond-type spy. His focus would be on cybercrime. He'd be James Bond on the computer, and this thought made him smile. Gill used the following words to describe his new case manager at the CIA: attractive, shapely, sexy, and mature. Gill knew they made her his supervisor because no one else could handle her. He wondered what made them think he could. Shelley was professional. Her dress code included tailored dress skirts and blouses. She resorted to flirting whenever there was a gap between her wishes and your desire to give her what she wanted. Her long blonde, unruly hair was her trademark. Gill jokingly believed himself to be a brown boy toy, doing what Shelley told him. Coming out of the foster care system in Virginia, she beat the odds and finished college on a scholarship from the agency. Her secret distrust in men is probably what propelled her career. She was the type of woman most men wanted, but could never tame. Independent, confident, and manipulative, with a schoolgirl attitude towards most men. During his childhood, Gill was considered privileged since he was the son of a banker and a schoolteacher. Working for the bank in Nigeria was a prestigious position, and Gill's father used it to help Gill get a college scholarship. Gill remembered those times when his father would take him to work with him. The young Gill would spend his day on the computer at the bank, and during that time, none of the bank employees relied on computers, opting for a more traditional paper and pencil method of documenting important information. The girls in his village said Gill was pleasing to look at. His blend of hazel and green eyes and 6-foot prowess made him considered to be tall and handsome. For Gill, joining the CIA wasn't exactly an offer as much as it was a strong request, which Gill knew better than to refuse. Gill was good at everything during his CIA training, except skydiving. If he didn't pass the skydiving test, he wouldn't be able to join the agency. He'd spent the better half of 2 weeks trying to overcome his fear of jumping out of a plane, and his stomach turned upside down each time the instructor spoke about it. Gill listened to the instructor's instructions and memorized them, yet the fear persisted. The instructor must have felt Gill's fears, because he explained in detail what the entire class already understood. Once the instructor explained the reasons for the training, Gill felt more relaxed. Even if he was frightened, the need to know how to safely jump out of a plane was far greater than his fear. His life could very well depend on him being able to land at a specific location within range. Being extracted from a particular location was no problem at all for Gill. It was the jumping out of a plane and landing within so many feet of his drop point. This was Gill's problem. For Gill, the overall training was effective. It revealed his weaknesses and his strengths. His strength is his ability to show little to no emotion regarding the situation, was something Gill already knew about himself, but it was his weakness that surprised him. He felt superior in knowledge because he was African-born. This turned out to be a direct contradiction to how white America viewed him. Many Americans saw him as a victim because he was born in Africa. The instructor explained that feeling one way about yourself and the world seeing you another way causes conflict. When Gill worked with the agency to get his family back, there was one fact he always remembered, but he never shared with anyone. Within the African village where he grew up, it was no secret the terrorists use Americans' weaknesses to their advantage. When the terrorist found a flaw in a man's character or way of life, they used it as a stepping stone to further their own agenda. It was common for cell members to mirror the unethical ways of their target to build trust. Gill's CIA training was not only action-based using survival skills, it contained lectures which encouraged trainees to think differently with precise and effective end results. Gill was grateful the CIA helped him and his family. He also understood the agency cared about him mostly because of his previous training in New Zealand, and the fact that he could be a danger to any country who relied on computers within their government. The terrorist exposed his high-tech abilities. The agency's options were to include him, train him, or eliminate him. Gill was thankful they'd decided to train him. "They tell me you show no emotions. Is this true?" Shelley asked Gill shortly after he'd arrived at Langley. "I have emotions, but most times I don't reveal them," Gill replied softly. "Well, what if an asset rubbed up against you like this?" Shelley rubbed her large breast on Gill's back. Gill was standing in the coffee room, drinking a cup of coffee as she displayed inappropriate sexual advances to him. Gill could smell her perfume and understood why American men said women like her were intoxicating. She slowly walked in front of Gill and faced him as she touched his tie and chest inappropriately. Gill allowed his manhood to stand at attention. Shelley looked at the front of Gill's pants and began to apologize. Gill, I'm sorry. I bet the guys I could make you show emotions. I'm sorry. I've gone too far." Gill's back was to the glass, and the men who were looking at them couldn't see the front of his pants, which was extended forward. It took Gill 30 seconds to put his manhood in check. He turned around to see almost the entire office looking at him. Gill smiled that sexy grin and slowly walked to his desk. He was embarrassed and a little upset to be the office entertainment. The next morning, Gill arrived to work a little late. He lived on the southeast side of D.C. Sure, it was a rough neighborhood, but he felt comfortable there. Plus, he didn't have people asking him what he did for a living. The neighborhood reminded him of his neighborhood in Nigeria. His neighbors in D.C. didn't care who he worked for, as long as he brought beer to the Friday night card party. Shelley was sitting at his desk when he arrived. "Osei, I've got an assignment for you. Step into my office," she said in her professional voice. This meant something was up, and it was serious. "Yes, sir," Gill replied as he quickly followed her, doubling back to pick up a pad and pen. Once inside her office, Shelley proceeded to brief Gill. "Are you familiar with a place called Toole?" Isn't that where the Army's chemical depot stores deadly nerve agents?" Gill replied slowly. You could tell Shelley was impressed. She continued to speak. "During the Gulf War, they did find weapons of mass destruction. The public was never told because they would have wanted to know the details. A couple days ago, the computer system which secures access to the chemical weapons department was hacked. Nothing was taken, but whoever is behind the breach wanted the U.S. government to know they'd broken in." "Why is the FBI not handling this?" Gill asked. "Because they couldn't find the breach. They're at a loss. And since there was an indication of one IP address originating in London, they called us in." Shelley knew this was Gill's first assignment, and there was so much information he didn't know or didn't have. Yet he maintained a composure of confidence. Finally, Shelley reached across the desk and picked up a folder which she handed him. "All the information is in this folder. Do you have any questions?" "Not now. But may I please approach you later today if I find any?" he asked. "Sure. I'll block a few minutes off this afternoon. Say around 3:30? If you have any questions, I'll meet you here. If not, I'll expect some progress. Oh yes, if you need to travel, contact the travel department. They'll set you up. All the information is in the file." Shelley walked out of her office, leaving Gill sitting there with the folder in his hand. This was her way of saying the meeting was over. Most managers stood up and waited for you to leave their office, but not Shelley. Gill worked with a two-man team to help him with the grunt work. His job was to locate, eliminate, and secure any hacks which were deemed to be a threat to U.S. security. Akinlana Osei was good at his job. Osei had an even deadlier skill. He could look at computer codes and devise ways to hack the program without anyone knowing. More and more, Shelley called him Osei, not Gill. It would be several weeks before she'd share why she insisted he use his African name. Osei's new assignment occurred on the same morning the IRS admitted to someone hacking the IRS website. It was crucial that the IRS breach was fixed as soon as possible. The thought of someone hacking into the chemical weapons depot was even more alarming. The press would never be told about the chemical weapons breach, and no one was admitting to any weapons of mass destruction. He didn't understand why the previous administration hadn't told the truth and cleared themselves. Then he realized telling the truth would have meant having to answer a lot of questions better left unanswered. Questions like, where did Saddam get the chemical weapons? The hackers of the chemical weapons depot were professionals, and they were good. They laid out a traceable path from London to major cities from around the world. When Jeffrey, the lead on Osei's two-man grunt team, notified him, he understood how the FBI became confused. Osei thanked Jeffrey, the red-headed computer geek from MIT, the same school Osei was on staff with before the CIA decided differently. Jeffrey, why don't you see if they need your help on the IRS hack? Let Shelley know, and she'll prepare the paperwork and see if they need you, Osei said. Sure, boss. But what if she asks me about this job? Osei knew he was right. Shelley would want to know his progress if he were offering his team up for another project. Tell her I'm on my way to London, and will text you any tasks. Sure thing, Jeffrey replied as he smiled. He, too, understood the around-the-world IP addresses were a game. The real hack took place in London, exactly where it started. Osei phoned the travel department and was on an overnight flight to London within 5 hours. He kept an overnight bag packed at work just for this type of situation. He was sure Shelley expected him to fly to the chemical weapons facility, and not to London. The travel department booked Osei's seat at the last minute, and he was bumped from coach to first class. He wasn't sure if this was a CIA perk or a coincidence. Either way, it was a relief. He could stretch out his long legs and rest his mind. Then, he'd go over all the information again to be sure he hadn't missed anything. Using IP addresses all over the world usually sent authorities on a wild goose chase. This was a hacker's endgame, to confuse the hell out of everyone. Connect to 10 different IP addresses when everything was accomplished using the original IP address. Osei knew it sounded silly, but more hackers than not used this simple technique, and most didn't get caught because the original IP address was always in a public place. He didn't want to have to explain this fact to Shelley or anyone. This kind of information was job security. To be continued.
If you enjoy the short stories created for Sandy's YouTube channel, please subscribe and hit the bell to be notified when new audiobooks are uploaded.